is Dr. Olivia Moses, and welcome to Wellness Live. This is the reboot of Living Whole's wellness webinars. The Living Whole Wellness Program has been provided here by the Department of Risk Management just for you. And we're doing a little bit of a different format today. Before we had wellness webinars where you could hear from our experts all across Loma Linda University Health's campus. We are now doing a format where you can actually see live our speakers and interact with them live. Another exciting thing about having this on video is that it will be archived on our Wholeness Health Plan website. So you can go ahead and get down your paper and pencil and write down everything that our speaker has to say, but you will be able to access all of this information, again, archived on our website. Again, we are here to hear a wonderful expert here from Loma Linda University Health. Her name is Chaplain Dilys Brooks. Now, Chaplain Dilys Brooks has been here with Loma Linda University for 10 years, and she's going on her 11th. And we are extremely blessed to have this woman who loves the Lord speak to us today on the pursuit of peace. So without further ado, I want to pass the time over to Chaplain Dilys Brooks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in this afternoon for this wonderful experience of coping with and living with this idea of peace, or pursuing peace, as I'm calling it. Just getting prepared for this particular seminar this afternoon, I am dealing with what you have dealt with probably all day today, and that is stress. I love this picture because it's so serene, so calming, and it makes me think of, wow, what if life was always like this? But the reality of it is life isn't always like this. So let's talk a little bit about what stress is, and let's talk about pursuing peace. So stress, this definition says everybody has stress. Adults, teens, even children, they experience stress at times. And stress can be beneficial by helping people develop the skills they need to cope with and adapt to new and potentially threatening situations through life. Stress is a condition that is often characterized by symptoms of physical or emotional tension. It is a reaction to a situation where a person feels threatened or anxious. Stress can be positive, such as planning a wedding, expecting the birth of a child, or it can be negative, like dealing with a natural disaster or the death of someone in your family. Watchman Nee, who is a famous Christian writer, says this: "An unpeaceful mind cannot operate normally. Hence, the apostle teaches us to have no anxiety or stress about anything." And that's found in Philippians 4, verse 6. "Deliver all anxious thoughts to God as soon as they arrive, and let the peace of God maintain your heart and mind." So we know that stress is natural. We know that stress is something that we deal with every single day. We know that there's good stress, and then there is the stress that we would call bad or negative stress. And often we talk about dealing with the stress in terms of coping with stress. We say we cope. How do we cope? Coping is changing in our bodies, minds, our environments to adapt to stress. And so the language we use often denotes this idea of just working around it or working with it. But what I want to talk about this evening is, instead of just coping with it, how about we pursue peace? Because stress brings about dis-ease, or a lack of peace, or this sense of being unpeaceful. I think I just made up a word. But nonetheless, that's what stress does to us. And so we're going to be looking at what it means to cope, and then what it looks at to pursue peace instead. So there are three main ways or tactics to cope. You can strengthen yourself, manage your environment, which means including your relationships, compartmentalize the stress when necessary. Most people, when stress occurs, will do one of the following things. They're either shocked, disbelief, they're numb, they feel sad, they cry, they act out, they yell, they get angry, they isolate themselves. Sometimes the thoughts of the event keep coming over and over again. It places them in this almost like a prison environment, and the stress isn't going anywhere, and they're not handling it very well. Rick Warren, a very popular Christian writer, says this about God in relation to stress. He says this: "Since God intends to make you like Jesus, he will take you through the same experiences Jesus went through. That includes loneliness, stress, criticism, rejection, and many other problems." Let's stop here for a moment. He is saying that God is going to allow us to go through experiences which are similar to what Jesus himself experienced. I can't tell you how many people I encounter and interact with on a regular basis who get stuck or struck by this idea that stress comes into our lives and that God allows it. Stress is something I know very well. Today was a stressful day. If I told you all the things I accomplished, actually I'll tell you a little bit. I just returned from a transatlantic flight. I think that's the distance I traveled. No, I was around the other part of the world. I was in Australia on Monday. I left there Monday and I got here Monday. Are you with me? Then we sat in traffic for 2.5 hours to get home. And then I've been trying to get my body adapted to this time zone, having gained a day. And then today, trying to get this together. So I'm not talking to you about something I don't know. I'm talking to you about something I live with every day. Did I mention I have 2 small children and a dog? Yeah, stress. I know what stress looks like. But what I've come to know over time is this. As a believer, as someone who follows Christ, that the stresses that come in my life, they're not new to him. They're not new to him, and he knows exactly what I'm going through and what you're going through. And when we're talking about pursuing peace as opposed to just simply coping, is this sense of when stress comes, it's making a decision. How am I going to respond to the stressors that are before me? Now, we said a few minutes ago that one, you strengthen yourself. That's one way of dealing with it. Another way is manage your environment and then compartmentalize the stress when necessary. John 14:27, Jesus says this, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Do not let your heart be troubled, nor let it be fearful." So again, we see Jesus, who was very acquainted with stress. He wasn't liked by the people who he came to talk to. The disciples he chose to follow him wasn't well received by the establishment. The people he chose to associate with were not well liked by those who thought they were in the know. And ultimately, the Bible teaches us that Jesus died on a cross. And that death was not a lovely one. It was very painful. So when he talks to us about giving us peace, we can trust that what he's saying is based on his experiences. And he was giving this counsel to his disciples before he even made it to the cross. Oh, you notice I had that twice? Stress. Another thing he says that Paul, one of his disciples, says in Galatians 5:22 is that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. And this goes along with a slide I shared with you a couple of steps before, which is this. When you and I come into contact with stressful experiences, we get to say, okay, how do we come through this? And as we're going through the stress, our character is shaped and we develop these types of characteristic traits: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, yes, gentleness, and self-control. Here, I want to share with you a spirituality checklist. It's a way of checking in when you're going through a stressful experience about where you are spiritually. Because where you are spiritually will indicate how you will cope with that stressful situation. Are you in the okay column? Are you in the needs work column? Or are you in the needs help column? Let's look at this okay column. In the okay column, spirituality, you enjoy worship, you're happy with spiritual fellowship, you're happy with your spiritual expression, you're able to give and receive love, you're able to appreciate beauty, you're creative, you're comfortable with your place in the world, and you're connected and peaceful. So if you're in a stressful situation and spirituality, your spirituality is in the okay column, guess what? You're going to deal with that stress in a different way than if you find yourself in the needs work column. Because when you're in the needs work column, let's see what we find here. You're less tolerant of different beliefs. You're feeling distance from God and you have a desire to feel closer. You don't know how to love or feel loved. You're feeling distant from others. You're struggling to understand others. You're not sure where you fit in. You find that something is missing. So you can imagine when a stressful situation comes up and your spirituality is in this needs work column, that you're going to handle that stress in a different way. And then finally, in this column here, if you're in the needs help column, what do we find? You have no reverence for anything outside of yourself. You're feeling alone and wandering aimlessly. You feel spiritually empty. You don't care about others. Nothing seems important. Feeling powerless to change life. You're out of touch, a loss of purpose, and a lack of moral compass. If you find yourself in this category, then we know that when stress comes and stressors come into your life, then you're certainly not going to cope or handle it very well, much less pursue peace. One of the things that you might consider doing as you're looking over your life and you're finding yourself in a stressful continuum is to take some time and do a stress journal. Just check on yourself. See, what are your stressors? How often are you being stressed? And this next slide has a tool that helps. It's called a stress management self-help checklist. And on this, it encourages you to keep a stress journal. It talks to you about taking care of your physical self by exercising, avoiding unnecessary stress, altering a stressful situation by expressing your feelings and or managing my time better, how you've adjusted your attitude to a stressor by reforming the problem, focusing on the positive or looking at the big picture, accepting the stressors I can't change and shared my feelings face-to-face with a trusted friend or family member, or did at least one activity from my stress relief toolbox, and final one, avoiding self-medicating with alcohol, food, or drugs. And this stress management self-help checklist is an amazing tool to use because it helps you to see how are you doing as you're finding ways to cope. Now, after you've taken care of yourself, you've eaten healthy, well-balanced meals, you're exercising, getting plenty of sleep, and you're still finding yourself at dis-ease or not at peace, what are some other things that you can do? This is where we talk about going from coping to pursuing. Praying. And I know that sounds almost cliche coming from the pastor, right? Yeah, when you're feeling stressed, pray. I'm not just talking about throwing up a prayer. I'm talking about taking intentional time as you are doing those additional activities such as walking or exercising or swimming or sitting with your pet or, gazing over a beautiful scene, but really reflecting and being mindful of that space and that time and having a conversation with God. One of our local pastors, John Ciccarelli, said recently when we were talking about prayer that prayer is not something you do. Prayer is a relationship that you have with God. So in this pursuing peace, instead of just focusing on coping, but going ahead of it and being proactive, making prayer a personal part of your time, your daily experience, not just when you're stressed, but before you're stressed. It almost becomes like a prophylactic, so to speak. That prayer becomes this thing you do continuously, daily, moment by moment. It puts you in that frame of mind of being in a relationship with God so that he can communicate with you some of the very things we talked about earlier. His promise is that he's giving you his peace, the peace that he used to be able to survive the stresses of this world. He has freely given to us as well. And then there's worship. This is not just your own personal worship, it's also corporate worship. Sometimes when we're in stressful situations, we don't want to be around other people. We take that time and say, I'm going to be by myself, especially if the people who cause you stress are the people you go to church with or the people you work with. So you don't want to be in proximity to them. Yet, in pursuing peace, it's saying, listen, instead of waiting till something bad happens, cultivate a worshipful experience. That is your own private time of worship and reflection on scriptures and singing. And then there's that corporate worship. It's being in that space with other believers and hearing their stories and interacting and listening to how they're overcoming that helps to strengthen you for those times when you're going through a stressful period. And can I tell you something that's a secret that nobody seems to notice or know? When you're going through something, tell the people you're in community with. Because once you start sharing your stories and your journey and where you are, especially within that worshiping community, you realize you're not the only person there. As a matter of fact, there are people there who are already overcoming or who might be going through the same experience you're having, and the two of you talking and communicating together will actually help strengthen you and give you this opportunity to grow in positive ways so that you can cope with and deal with the stressors to come. Reading your sacred texts, spending time reading scripture. There are people who say, I read the Bible and I fall asleep. I want to tell you there's so many versions of the Bible that are out there right now that you can find a Bible that you can read through. I'm not talking about studying. I'm talking about reading those texts that help to comfort and remind you. Some of my favorite passages of scriptures are found in the Psalms. David, who is credited with writing at least half of those Psalms, is very familiar with being down and out, is very familiar with highs and lows and challenges that you and I face today. So reading through sacred texts is another way for you to pursue peace, not just when you're going through, but ahead of time. challenging your beliefs. There are things that happen in our lives that make us question God, and it's okay to ask questions about him. Another book in the Bible, the book of Job, tells us of a man who didn't do anything, and tragedy hits his life. And he spends his time just asking these difficult questions. And he didn't get struck down by lightning. As a matter of fact, the scripture tells us that God came and visited him and spoke with him and talked with him about the challenges that he was facing and the stressors that had come into his life. And the last one that I would share with you with regards to pursuing peace is accountability. We're not meant to be alone. Every one of us needs at least one or two people. There's this old show back in the day, in the 80s or 90s. I can't remember what decade it was now, but it was a show called Cheers. And the tagline for Cheers was, it was the place where everybody knew your name. And in that setting, while it was true it was in a bar, in that setting, people checked in on one another. Who are the people checking in on you? Not just when you're in crisis, but before you're in crisis. And are you someone that people could rely on to check in on them when they're going through or struggling in a crisis? These five things that I shared with you, I think are great tools to put in your wheelhouse, not just when you're going through a stressful time, but before. Because when you develop the habits of prayer and worship and reading scripture and challenging and being willing to challenge your beliefs and having accountable relationships, when the stressors come, you're not just coping, you're thriving and you're moving through that time. Again, when you're doing these particular when you're doing the pursuing and the praying and so on and so forth, they help to move you from the needs help category to the needs work to the okay, so that you're in a better place to handle those stressors that come your way. One of my favorite passages of scripture, actually the verse that I live by every day, is found in Matthew 6:33 and 34. And it reads, "But seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." I wish I could tell you that I came to this text just when I was in a great place in my life. I wasn't. It was a very challenging time for my family and I. And I remembered being down and out and just struggling with, why was I going through these very challenging situations? And I started to practice the things I shared with you, just starting to pray and reading scripture and saying, God, what is going on? And this is the passage of scripture that he gave to me and also gave to my husband. Because this is just a subsection of a larger conversation Jesus is having as he's teaching this large multitude on the side of a hillside in Galilee. And he's saying, don't worry about tomorrow. You can't fix tomorrow. Don't worry about the things that you can't change. Instead, develop a life of pursuing me, seeking my kingdom, seeking after me. And he says, and if you do that, that's what Jesus says, if you seek me, I promise you this. It is not that trouble won't come, because it will come tomorrow. He says, but today, in your seeking and pursuing me and the things of God, all the things that you need will be added to you. And I want to encourage you to do that. This pursuit, more than coping, is living this life of abundance and living this life of saying that I'm going ahead and I'm pushing and striving forward. And that, I would encourage you, comes through a relationship, a daily relationship with Jesus Christ. If you know someone who needs immediate help, I've given you a few contacts, hotlines, crisis hotlines, and we're going to put those up on the web as well so that you can reach out if you know someone who is in a stressful situation and in need of outside help. And within the enterprise as well, we have our BMC that you can reach out and call. As a matter of fact, if you call 911 and you say, I need help, they're going to direct you to the right place to go. Here are some of the websites that I used that I shared with you, some of the information that was here. And I want to encourage you, friends. Peace is what God desires for us to have. Why don't you pursue it?
Well, thank you so much to Chaplain Dillis. That was fantastic. I love this idea of pursuing peace. So we're going to go now to your computer. So those of you who are watching us live, please type in any questions that you have for Chaplain Brooks today on the question of pursuing peace. But while you're doing that, while you're typing, there are a few things that I would love to chat with with Chaplain Dillis about. And this is one of the questions. You know, I love the topic that you have today and the idea of pursuing peace. Mm-hmm. A lot of times in our lives, we get so overwhelmed by the day's activity. Mm-hmm. And all we do is go from day to day and hoping we can just survive it. Right. Can I get through this day unscathed? Mm-hmm. But that active word pursuing. Mm-hmm. lets me know that I am empowered, that I can actually do something about this.
Yes.
And I know you deal with a lot of people on a daily basis, just a few, maybe two
Yes.
or three, right? What do you think gets in the way of us having that active process of pursuing?
Olivia, I think we think it's normal. You know, the stage of life that I am in, for example, I have young children at home, I work full time, my husband works, and I've been talking with my friends. It's like, what is going on? It seems like our mothers were able to handle it so much better than we can. They were up early. I mean, the things I saw my mother do, I'm not doing, right? So I'm like, what's going on? I think what I've had to learn to do, and my friends have learned to do, is say, you know what, we can't do it all. Like, this isn't normal. Normal isn't this frenetic running, that we actually get to say yes to some things and no to some things. And we're still good wives and still good mothers and still good sisters and daughters and sons. But being willing to say no. And if we don't want to say no, then we have to ask why. Why don't you want to say no? Is the frenetic, busy pace filling a space, an emptiness, other pain, other hurt that you don't want to deal with? Because there's some of us who keep busy so we don't have to deal with other issues that we're facing, other challenges that we have.
Right. No, that's an interesting word. Can you tell? No, just kidding. Yeah. So we have some questions that have come through. Here's one. I felt at times stressed about how much I don't stay connected with God. What is the best way to handle this type of stressor?
Get connected with God.
Well,
It's that simple. Feeling, if you remember the chart that I showed you, it talked about whether you were okay, needs work, or needed help. If you have a sense of, wow, I'm missing my time with God, instead of allowing your feeling of shame or disappointment or hurt or regret overpower you, take that as a gentle nudge to go, okay, then I'm going to spend some time with God. And forgive yourself for not doing it. He'll forgive you. Just start doing it. And it doesn't have to be a half an hour right away. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Practicing mindfulness, allowing him to show and reveal himself to you in the simple things that you're doing. As you're taking a walk, even washing dishes. You know, instead of, we often just allow the guilt we feel about the not doing it to overwhelm us, that we miss out that all he wants us to do is just to come. That's all.
That's great. We have another question. This person asks, you mentioned the idea of prayer. I don't know where to start with the practice of it. Do you have any suggestions or resources to help someone like me?
Yes, I do. And I can give you additional resources online about how to pray. But can I tell you a secret? Prayer is a conversation. It's not, don't try to pray like you hear other people pray. Just talk to God. Simply by saying, God, I don't even know if you're hearing me, but it's me. You know, I'm here. And start pouring out what your heart's desires or your needs are. Too often, we allow our inability or what we think is supposed to be a good prayer, supposed to sound like, block us from just actually having a conversation with God. And there are other people who think God is too lofty that I can't speak to him, you know, in an ordinary way. But the truth of the matter is, he's everywhere. Like, he knows what we're saying, so just talk to him. Just talk.
No, that's great. We have another person asking a question. What if I feel the people in my circle don't want to hear about my stress issues?
It's almost as if you have a sign on your, and when you're coming in, they go, oh, here she goes again. Maybe those people aren't the places you should go. Maybe you need to see someone like a therapist, you know, or a counselor. Even maybe go spend some time with a pastor or some other spiritual advisor. Maybe that's the place you get to go and unburden and unload everything that's going on with you. Sometimes we have expectations from our family members or our close friends that they can't meet. Because remember, they're also dealing with their own personal issues and their personal stresses. So they can't become that community where you dump everything. Now, it's one thing to go and say, could you pray with me about something? Or could you, I feel discouraged, could you encourage me? That's a different thing. But having your friends or your family be the place where you come and unburden every stressor, that's too much weight for them to carry. So I would recommend maybe reaching out to someone professionally or within your spiritual community who has more time on their hands and maybe a little bit more training to deal with with that kind of stress.
So here's another question. We deal a lot with abundance.
Yes.
Too much of everything.
Yeah.
Too much of things to do, too many people to meet, too much food, too much abundance. And we're having all of these things always bombarding us.
Uh-huh.
And it can be overwhelming.
Yes.
And then sometimes we are so bombarded, we don't stop to be grateful. So where does gratefulness work into this whole idea of peace?
So there's this phenomenon called FOMO. Have you ever heard of it? The fear of missing out. It's actually a term they use to describe a generation of humans on this planet at this moment. And that means that we don't want to put our phones down, we don't want to turn the TV off, we don't want to get off our computers because we're afraid that in the moments it takes for us to stop looking at those little screens, that we would miss out on something. So if you're always focusing on what everybody else is doing, then you really can't think about what you're thankful for. And so I think one of the ways to really put the brakes on that is to commit as a family, commit individually, commit with your friends to say, we're going to have some time during the day where we put all the little screens off, turn them off, put them down. And instead of focusing on what's on the screen, let's everybody share one thing they're thankful for. One of the things we do with our children Sabbath afternoons when we're home, we say, what was your Sabbath high, your Sabbath low? And that simply means, what was the one thing you're thankful for today, or what was one thing you weren't so happy about today? And it encourages them to really just start to think and reflect about something that they're thankful for. In that time that you're spending with God, part of that is to be thankful. Make that, say, God, in the time I'm spending with you, I'm going to spend some time just being thankful, and start listing things of thankfulness. And once you start developing this attitude of gratitude, it starts to spread. You'll talk about not what you need or what your stresses are anymore. You'll start talking about what you're thankful for. So you'll say, man, despite the fact that I lost my wallet while I was in Australia, and that has bothered me, my husband said, but hey, we're all here. We're all here, we're all alive. There are no problems, there are no issues. And I went, you know what, you're right. And I had a moment to feel sorry for myself, which I did, fully. And then I said, I'm going to let it go, and I'm going to think about what I'm thankful for and keep moving forward from there.
Wonderful. Another question we have here coming from one of the viewers is, what resources exist here at LLU that can help me with my stress? And I can chime in too, so go ahead, please.
Well, I would say we would talk to Dr. Moses about that. We have people that you can talk to. Let's start with that. Your frontline defense. You have your chaplains that are available. If you're working in the medical center, you do have Kathy McMillan, who is there, who's also available and can also extend resources to you. We have our employment assistance program, where you can go and meet with a counselor at least 10 free sessions a year, if I remember correctly. That's available. It's private, it's confidential. If that is not, if you need more than that, there are so many other mental health practitioners in the community. We also have local pastors. We have so many churches in this area, both Adventist and churches that are not. So if you're someone of a different faith, we can also connect you with those with a variety of people. There on our website, you can also find ways to connect to those of us who can then direct you to numbers or websites for people who can give you help as well.
I think a lot of people, they feel stressed out when they feel out of control, or they don't feel like they're doing enough to take care of themselves. So in addition to all those wonderful mental health resources to assist in stress that Chaplain Dillis talked about, we also have the Drayson Center. Go out and get some energy just worked out on a treadmill or on an outside track. Go to an aerobics class. If you feel out of control in certain areas of your life, we also have weight management programs run out of the Living Whole Wellness program. We also have a wonderful program called the Unstuck program, which is basically a program for anybody who feels stuck. And sometimes feeling stuck in your life and you can't move or get to the next step or get to happiness can actually be very stressful. So we have a program called Unstuck that actually helps you get unstuck into that next step or phase of happiness in your life. So we have a wonderful amount of resources here for you. So I want to thank Chaplain Dillis Brooks for blessing us with your presence here on Wellness Live, our very first episode of Wellness Live. And I wanted to thank you for joining us as our viewer. Again, you can see all of these on an archive basis on our website. So please check us out. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Olivia Moses, and I can't wait to see you on our next Wellness Live.